Web designer versus web developer. What's the difference and which one would suit you better? We're going to jump into this question straight away here. We can see that a web designer uses completely different programs and a different skill set. So traditionally, a web designer uses Photoshop, Figma, and Adobe XD, where just the actual design is done. So the layout, if you will, perhaps planning of different elements on a website, and so on, versus a developer who uses programming languages such as HTML, CSS, PHP, JS, which stands for JavaScript. And the developer spends his day coding, writing code. So even this very website will have some code attached to it. For example, if we take any page here in the Google search results, essentially someone has to write all of this. This is what a coder is doing. We've been talking about JavaScript. A coder needs to understand basically everything that's in here. These are HTML elements, for example. So this is what a coder does versus a designer who would have come up with the logo of Harvard Medical School, for example, and maybe a bit of planning of how certain articles are laid out, and so on. So we can see that a developer is working much more on the technical aspects and putting the design, how the website should look, into action. However, there are a couple of differences when it comes to price levels of websites. So I'm going to try to illustrate that in here. So if we talk about cheap websites, so cheap web design, one second, let us do this again. So we're talking about cheap web design projects. In those cases, oftentimes the developer and the web designer are the same person. What that means is oftentimes people buy a template or theme. So for WordPress, for example, and then they install this template or theme onto a website, and they slightly change the design to make it fit for their client, or if it's their own website, to make the design for their own company. But we can see this is all the same person here who's essentially just buying a theme. And this is quite often how web design is done these days. It's hugely popular way to create WordPress websites. Call this WP. And this would be probably for websites under $2,000. This is the process that most people would use because it's too expensive to pay. Firstly, okay, let's go for the expensive version of a website here. We just call this EXP. So high budget web design projects, essentially, you will have one person who's the designer. This person only does the design. Then ideally you will have a different person who's the copywriter. Even though not part of this video here. Let's just say she's a lady because she's wearing an interesting dress here. So she's writing the copy, this guy's doing the design, and then we have a developer. If you're talking about really complicated projects, you've got one front-end developer who basically turns the design into code, and then you have one back-end developer as well who makes those really complicated things work, like database interactions, and so on. So now all of a sudden, for an expensive web design project, we're paying 4 different people, and if they're all located in the US or Australia, then this can get expensive very quickly. Hence why a lot of web design projects are sort of made on the lower budget end, where essentially you only have one designer. He's not even using Photoshop or Figma because he's just buying a pre-made theme. So and that theme would have been made by someone who's used Photoshop design, but now that it's all designed, people just go straight to this design template and install it, and then change a couple of things. And because it's a basically website that comes finished out of the box, you also don't need a developer. So it depends hugely on the sort of project size. That's mainly what I want to get at in this video, that oftentimes a developer, whether it's a front-end developer, back-end developer, is not required. On low cost products, you probably don't have a copywriter. The text will either come from the web designer itself or from the business owner. And again, the limited amount of design is done by someone who just purchases a theme. And then this person who buys a theme likely needs to know CSS, HTML to make those changes. A little bit of JavaScript would be helpful as well. If your client asks you to create a pop-up, you could use JavaScript to create that pop-up basically. You usually don't have to know PHP. That would be sort of more into the development kind of realm for higher level projects. And but this is the skill set of like basic web design projects under $2,000 that is required. CSS, HTML, JavaScript, and usually knowing WordPress is required as well. So hope that sheds some light on the different people involved in larger scale web design projects versus your regular low cost productions, and also gives you an idea if you can maybe get started with just learning WordPress, CSS and HTML, and then decide from there if you want to further go into becoming a, in quotation marks, proper designer using Figma, Photoshop, Adobe XD and stuff. And then likely all you do every day is just designing websites in those programs. And similar to a seasoned developer, he will only be coding every day in HTML, CSS, PHP, and so on. So the other version here where we use WordPress, that's a bit of a mixed bag. Sometimes you might be still designing graphics in Photoshop and then changing other layout elements with CSS programming language. So if you're doing low budget productions, you basically have to do everything yourself. Whereas in higher cost productions, you've got different people who have highly specialized skill sets that they're paid for. So yeah, hope this makes sense. Any questions, feel free to leave some in the comments below. Thank you for watching.